Bramblevest actually did a good job of shutting him down in the lane. We'll see whether either of these teams do draft that way. But as we come in, LeBlanc, very high priority ban in the last couple of days. Same with the Zac. And the Gragas is seen as a lot of play. And of course, Trashy for Splyce on the Gragas. What do you know? He loves playing that. Always has success.
Yeah, no real surprises with that being taken away from him. His most played jungler across the course of this split by a long margin. We'll have an Elise ban as well coming out from Splyce.
Now that leaves the Caitlyn. You've also got the Cho'Gath to come through, and then Thresh as the last priority. Now, Kalista over the last day or so has risen in priority as well, getting good laning setups, getting good early skirmishes as well. So interesting to see how Kalista has risen over since yesterday's initial games.
And alongside that, you have that tank busting potential with the Kalista to a degree. We are going to see a tank taken away by Splyce, and immediately Ninjas in Pyjamas going back to that Caitlyn. Was changed slightly on 7.14, her attack speed modifier reduced by 2%, but it's not too big a change.
So now you give up the likes of potentially the Thresh, but it's the Braum that comes out. We've seen this combination very heavily played over the last day. The Braum, the Sejuani, the passive stacking, and the slows, the crowd control that comes through is very difficult to deal with, and this is very good setup for Trashy. On the remaining junglers, with the Zac gone, the Gragas gone, the Elise gone, the Cho gone, so much focus, and now NIP have to get shook on something else. The Kha'Zix would be there if he wants a carry jungler.
And that's more Shook style as well. He's known for these assassin junglers, the Kha'Zix, the Lee Sin, the Elise to some degree as well. Perhaps the Rek'Sai just skirting on the edge of that meta. We will see Nagne get that Taliyah, and perhaps he'll be Lord of the Pit once again. And it looks like it might be a Syndra here for Splyce.
Yeah, the Syndra here would be able to secure a lane matchup. We know Splyce like to get scaling components from their mid or top lane, so I wouldn't be surprised to see Splyce wait for the counter pick now on the top lane for Wunder, depending on what Prophet ends up drafting. But as we head into ban phase 2, I don't think there's anything overly surprising right now in this draft. The biggest component of Splyce's draft has been hit shook immensely hard. All 4 bans right now potentially aimed towards that jungle role.
Yeah, getting rid of the Rek'Sai as well. There is still that Kha'Zix lurking in the wings that we have talked about. Ninjas in Pyjamas are going to go towards the AD carry bans here, taking away the Jhin, looking towards perhaps those AD carries that can utilize Duskblade.
Yeah, and taking away one of these AD carries that can at least have a decent laning phase against the Caitlyn. We've also got to look at the Varus here as another pick. The Tristana we may see, but gets outranged quite heavily early on. Pretty much every champion suffers that against the Caitlyn, so you basically have to decide to play for a little later in the game.
It's going to be a Kha'Zix ban here against Shook as well, so Splyce have read our minds, have been doing their background research, know that Shook likes that Kha'Zix pick. Lee Sin is still there, something he's played a few times across this split. Graves and Olaf, his other 2 champions he's picked up.
So Jack's now gone, may indicate Prophet wants to play the Jarvan up in the top lane, and if Splyce were to pick Renekton, we just saw that matchup be contained very well. The Varus we expected out of Splyce coming through into the Caitlyn is no big surprise, but look, now Shook has to find something. You mentioned the Lee Sin coming through. Will it be one of these outside picks, the Skarner, the Rammus, these B-tier tanks that can still work, or is it going to be early game focus coming through?
It would make sense for Ninjas in Pyjamas to play around the early game. The early game has been their strongest portion throughout this split. It is going to be the Jarvan that you alluded to earlier on, Stress, and now final pick for Ninjas in Pyjamas. I would love this Evelyn. This is something that Shook was known for, actually, when he played on Alliance, when they made their bid for Worlds in 2015. Not going to perhaps go towards it here.
It's a very outside play style, difficult to play around, but I think we're likely to see the tank setup coming through here. We just saw Maokai played in the previous game. I was saying we're expecting tanks. No, we're not. We're expecting the Lee Sin coming through. In the end of all things, they bait us out.
That they do. A composition very similar to a lot of the Ninjas compositions we've seen throughout the split. Splyce still had their last pick, and it will be looking up towards that top lane.
Now, we've got the Camille locked in. Of course, that can do a very similar job of the Jax later on. It's a little trickier for Camille to take over, but you can have that side lane control later on. Prophet, I expect to get a lot of attention from Shook in the early game, to try and get him ahead, try and push Wunder behind, and actually get NIP rolling, because remember, Nagne can go there as well, utilizing that Weaver's Wall.
And it's interesting to see how the draft priorities actually changed for these teams, because A couple of weeks ago, we would have said Thresh is must pick, must ban. Caitlyn's must pick, must ban. Here, we see NIP get both of those, and we still look at the Splyce lineup and say, well, they got Sejuani and they got Braum, and that's a superior combo in a lot of respects.
I think what Splyce were going for with the route you're talking here is they don't actually fear NIP's snowballing opportunities. They don't think that NIP can close a game with a lead. And sure enough, that is something we have seen NIP struggle with. So maybe they have the way now of playing around this Lee Sin, around this snowballing, and deny them any opportunity to close out the game.
If you think NIP will take their first series of the split, make sure you get involved at LOL eSports, #NIPwin or #SPYwin if you think Splyce can keep the road to Worlds alive. It's incredibly important that they win today to keep their hopes for playoffs going on. If they lose, they are pretty much looking at that 4th spot, Stress, and with it, no chance of getting to the World Championships once again.
Splyce will be wanting desperately to maybe regain some of their status. The World Championships didn't necessarily go so well, and they haven't been doing a great job so far in the 2017 season when you look at high placements at the end of a split. But summer might be the time for Splyce. They had this big run last year that worked out very well for them. See if they can replicate some of that success again as we head into game. Ninjas in Pyjamas, it should be a fairly straightforward series from Splyce's side of things. They're expected to win this.
Definitely the underdogs on the blue side for this first game, and they've drafted a composition that is not too dissimilar from ones we have seen them draft in the past. Splyce, on the other hand, going for this tank jungler, going for the Braum early on as well, really looking towards this crowd control composition that works so well as soon as you catch one person out.
So when you look at the lane setups, of course, Sencux is likely to have the early game presence in mid lane. You'll have that push priority that should give Trashy a little bit more freedom. HeaQ can't quite go as aggressive into his jungle because of the fact that Nagne is likely to be shoved in. Prophet, you'd anticipate having a little bit of an early start against this. Camille should be able to do a decent job, but it's not so difficult for Wunder that he can't play safe in this lane and just maintain this Jarvan.
It's the first time we've seen Wunder on this Camille this split. I have to see how well he does with that split pushing meta that has arisen in some compositions.
And then finally, down in the bottom lane for NIP, HeaQ and Sprattel should be able to have at least decent push potential utilizing the Caitlyn, the laning strength of the Caitlyn and the Thresh alongside, but Braum Varus will be able to play on the defensive here. Wave clear, sit back in the lane. We'll see whether Kobbe and Mikyx actually go towards that, because I know, Medic, you've been looking into a lot of how Kobbe and Mikyx play in that bot lane.
And as much as the lane might seem like it's going to push towards them, Kobbe and Mikyx actually spend a huge amount of time pushed past the mid portion of that wave. Over almost 40% of the early game for Mikyx is spent pushed into the enemy's side of the map. So as much as the lane may play against them, we'll have to see if they're willing to accept standing underneath their tower and farming.
We spent so much time talking about bottom lane that we didn't actually hint at the fact that Nagne, he took a small raptor away. HeaQ didn't quite get the level off the camp, and that means Nagne, as he went forward, now off the red buff, is going to be hurting a little for that experience. It did help Nagne get the level 2, though, in the lane, which is actually quite a nice thing, because Nagne is able to reverse some of this early game pressure on Sencux. And we'll keep our eyes on that bottom lane point that you were talking about, whether Kobbe and Mikyx are pushing forward in the lane. It's one of the things that makes it very difficult to contend with on the Splyce bottom lane, is they're very aggressive. They know when to take the trades in the lane, and they're very good at punishing their opponents. Against Caitlyn Thresh, maybe not so much.
Sprattel will land the hook. Mikyx going to have to dodge his way around the tasty cupcakes in the bottom lane, and will be fine for the time being.
Hang on. Those cupcakes are for yordles. They're yordle snap traps. Medic, you are the least yordle-like person on our broadcast crew. They are not for you.
It doesn't mean I don't find them tasty. Sometimes forbidden fruit is the most delicious.
Stealing cupcakes. I see how it is. That
how do you think I got to this size?
Here.
How do you think I got to this size, Stress? It wasn't just because I took the food that was given to me. I managed to sneak some away from time to time, and at the moment, HeaQ is looking to sneak up towards this top lane. We talked about it in picks and bans. He wants to be coming up towards this top to try and get Prophet ahead in this lane.
And look at how easily read this is out of Splyce's side. Wunder drops back in the lane. This wave is pushing towards Wunder, and he can just sit back and farm it out, maybe get this one if he's not too overzealous at it, and drop back. Yes, okay, now his shield is gone, so if it dives under the tower, he's a little bit more in danger. But Wunder isn't playing this riskily by any means. He knows he has to concede some of the early game, and HeaQ just spent a lot of time up in this top lane, as HeaQ likes to do. He stands around the back of lanes and doesn't do a whole lot sometimes.
And he's 10 CS behind because of it. That's Trashy getting the Krugs, gives you 10 CS just off the back of them, and now HeaQ is just that little bit behind, but has gone towards the double longswords, probably up towards the warrior enchant that we tend to see on the Lee Sin. Stress, I want to talk a little bit about tank busting in the current meta, because it's such an important thing for AD carries to do, and it's the reason we're seeing more Kalista and more Tristana coming up. We've got a Caitlyn here who has been known as a late-game hyper carry, but in the mid-game, she can sometimes struggle to get through tanky front lines.
Absolutely, until you get past both the attack speed items and then the Lord Dominic's that comes through into a build, it's so tough for Caitlyn to actually deal damage to the front line. That's where I'm wondering whether we'll start seeing a few more of the tank-busting mid laners that come through, or at least the scaling mid laners, but I'm not expecting to see a resurgence of like an Azir coming through. It's not quite the time. Varus, on the other hand, does have decent tank-busting capabilities. Now, NIP don't necessarily have the greatest front line of tanks, but still, Kobbe should be able to output a significant amount of damage earlier on in the game for HeaQ.
Just coming back to those tank-busting mid laners as well, I've heard rumors of a Malzahar.
Yeah.
More in NA than EU, but you never know.
Sencux has played it this split. They are the kind of team that like playing that Malzahar with the teleport for a 1-3-1. Maybe we'll see that in a future game.
Have to wait and see. It's always a possibility, Stress. A pretty slow early game from these two teams. HeaQ not being able to get the ganks off towards the top lane that he would like, but now he's going to see if he can catch Trashy out. Unable to do so, he will claim the Scuttle Crab for his own and be satisfied with the increased vision in the river.
Now we've got to look at what Splyce put into the draft and what they've taken out of it, because they hit HeaQ's champion pool so hard that he went to the champion he always plays in Lee Sin. Now, the reason they did that is because Lee Sin is in this awkward spot where you have a good early game, but you don't teamfight anywhere near as successfully as a lot of the tanks in the meta right now. So HeaQ has to have some sense of impact in this game. We are 6 minutes in, and he has done nothing. Doesn't yet have his ultimate available. We'll see where he goes once he's past that level 6 mark.
And I think that's a big thing, Stress. That ultimate can be very impactful if you can catch out low mobility carries in the backline. He can try and jump onto Syndra. He can try and jump onto Varus. And if he does get one of them, perhaps that can turn the team fight. But it's a big if.
Yeah, it is a big if. Sencux, as a side note, looking at our last series with Power of Evil's mobility Syndra build, this is a Thunderlords not going Frost Queen's claim likely Syndra. This is more about damage. But here we go. HeaQ heading to the top side. He's warded. He's not going to do anything. Once again, NIP no options on the top side, and that means Splyce will be happy to wait for a bit because Trashy's ult is a whole lot easier to have impact on.
Well, we talk time and time again about the NIP early game leads that they managed to gain. It's one of the only portions, really, where we see NIP getting ahead. And you can see, even against a team like Splyce, who've been looking relatively consistent, NIP have the lead. They're ahead at 15 minutes in gold. They get a lot of first bloods, tied first for that, and they are good at denying the enemy towers.
And they're looking to set themselves up potentially for a play on the top side, but Wunder is playing on the defensive aspect, although HeaQ, now he's backed away, was spotted. Oh, Wunder's now coming forward in the lane. Got to be very careful he doesn't get caught here.
Here goes Prophet, but Wunder wall jumps away. HeaQ still not six, is looking for the kill. Here comes Prophet once again, the Cataclysm. Oh. And the pause straight away.
Whoa.
It was a great flash from Wunder. He is outside of the Cataclysm, but we'll have to find out exactly what's going on here.
I can see the referees talking with Prophet and the Ninjas in Pyjamas, so hopefully we'll get an update for you soon. But look, we were talking about how top lane was maybe one of the areas we wanted to see NIP go to with this Taliyah, with the Jarvan, try and get everybody in the top lane and snowball them through. And we're at that pivotal moment here, where for NIP, they've gone aggressive with the play we were expecting from them, and we need to see what the result ends up being, because Splyce are actually okay with waiting a little bit longer in this game, at least with the top lane.
And once again, it's HeaQ on an aggressive jungler being able to try and get these leads for the team. If Wunder does fall here, that's first blood. It's a lot of damage on the tower as well. You make Wunder have to burn his teleport to get back into the lane, and HeaQ will probably hit 6, which just accelerates that gank potential.
Yeah, it's been a decent attempt here from NIP. One thing that has also been going their way that is a little surprising on the matchup is the fact that Nagne, through getting level 2 early and being able to make his way back into lane, utilizing the level 2 boots, has actually got a lead here. We're getting right back into the game. Remember, Wunder is in a lot of danger in the top lane. And
here we go. He's able to walk away. Yeah, so HeaQ didn't flash. Decided he didn't want to go all in for it. Wunder does have to back away, which means NIP will get some damage on that top lane tower. And the question becomes now, what's Trashy going to do? Where can he go to try and play around the fact that HeaQ's on the top side of the map?
Well, look how heavily Nagne was pushing. Trashy does get caught on that ward though, so Trashy doesn't have the opportunity to go in. But I like this. Miky's going to come out of the lane. This is something Mikyx very frequently does when they're pushed up, is move out with Trashy, assume control of the enemy jungle, and then back away. They just take the red buff, don't overcommit to the fight. But look, TP's coming through. NIP want to force it.
Trying to get in the way of the Arctic Assault, but Trashy uses it afterwards. Here comes the wall as Trashy's caught out. Ace in the hole comes down, and Prophet gets first blood. Tried to jump across, could not connect onto Sencux, but the kick back from HeaQ. Sencux has to flash away. Nagne flashes the wall, but cannot hit the knockback, and NIP will have to settle with just 1 kill.
Well, this is what NIP, we talked about them being good at, and this is actually a response to something Splyce do very frequently. We were talking about it, how Mikyx and Trashy, when they see the jungler topside, they go into the bot side jungle, get vision down, and instantly Prophet comes in with the teleport. They get the first kill of the game, and that's a great start for NIP. This is in line with what they have been doing for a few weeks now.
It looks like Splyce are going to try and react to the fact that Prophet gets that red buff and gets the first kill. They're bringing their bot lane up here. Trashy's on his way as well. Prophet, no flash, no TP, no help from HeaQ for the time being. Kobbe's got 6. They could look for the engage.
But at this point, Prophet knows that because the bottom lane hasn't come back into the lane, he has to be careful here. A lot of respect being given over in the top lane for this game. Now Splyce want to try and race down this Caitlyn and Thresh, and they should be a little bit faster on it, but they may get baited into the fight here. HeaQ is around, but Trashy throws the ult.
Glacial Prism comes out into the chain of corruption, and that's the CC chain from Splyce. Another kill for them. HeaQ's going to jump in, though, trying to get onto Wunder, and Nagne's doing a lot of work, threading the volleys where he can. The stun's going to land onto HeaQ. Trashy will go down 1 for 1 now as Nagne gets chased out by Kobbe. Another threaded volley will connect, and they do not get the tower. Meanwhile, in the bottom lane, NIP will get first turret blood.
So NIP, the gold swing goes over to NIP with the first turret blood going over. But look, Splyce, they got a little bit of momentum on the top side, and importantly, 2 kills go on to Kobbe. This is going to strengthen his earlier game spike that we might see have influence in the next few skirmishes. But look, good ult from Trashy, hits on to Prophet in the lane. Of course, if you don't hit that square, you will only get the slow, so manages to get the full amount of crowd control from that. Trashy, not quite tanky enough this early on. Hasn't obviously finished the Cinder Hulk. We are too early on in the game for that, so doesn't quite recognize the amount of damage output. But look, Kobbe picks up 2 kills. Good start for Splyce on the top side. Got to commend NIP at the same time. They are still marginally ahead.
Ever so slightly, but what getting those first towers does is it opens up longer lanes for these top laners. Wunder now on this Camille can try and farm up just a little bit more, try and get towards that 2-3 item Camille that we have seen be a terror in the late game, and it looks like Splyce are happy just to scale up into the late game here. Yes, you're facing a Caitlyn, yes, you're facing a Taliyah, but you have 3 strong sources of damage compared to only the 2 from NIP.
Oh, Medic, look at it. It's another Bramble Vest on Jarvan. We saw this contain Renekton in our Series 1 of the day today. Now, I wonder how much that's going to do against Camille. Obviously, returning a lot of the damage, the resistances. Doesn't matter at this point because he keeps getting caught out.
Does have flash, does have heal,
Lands
dodges.
Here.
The Winter's Bite dodges the Glacial Prism, and perhaps they're going to turn this one around. But here's Sencux on the flank. He meets 3 members of NIP and needs to back away for the time being. HeaQ now caught out. The play comes back onto Wunder. That's a kill on HeaQ, and HeaQ will fall as well. 2 for Splyce very quickly.
Another important fight for the Splyce boys as they turn towards Rift Herald right now. And look, NIP had good trades early on, but Sencux being able to roam out of the lane mixed with the amount of damage, even with the crowd control not quite landing, Splyce just had enough to take it to NIP, and NIP didn't realistically have enough to respond. And that very well could crack this game open for Splyce. Now, with the Rift Herald, they can push past this Taliyah should they choose to. Maybe start controlling the game a whole lot more, because look, HeaQ, he knew he was in danger all the way from the beginning of this play and actually does a decent job. Flashes the Q from Braum, dodges out, then gets the Lantern, eats basically the cooldown now of the Braum ultimate, but from their NIP, they think they can go aggressive. Not the case as Sencux. You know, the skill just shows there when you press R.
It takes a lot of skill.
Takes a lot of skill. Cho'Gath is like the new equivalent.
You have to press 2 buttons for Cho'Gath, though.
Yeah, I guess.
Stone plate and then R.
Double the amount of skill.
Takes tons of skill. Come on, Stress. But what I like from Splyce here is in picks and bans, and earlier on we were talking about NIP's early game. Splyce have been able to shut that down. NIP are going to be behind around the 15-minute mark, and Splyce are taking advantages across the map.
Yeah, they've done a good job of actually recouping a lot of the losses they had against NIP. You can see bot lane is even when it comes to the CS kills in favor of Splyce. Sencux has caught back up on some of that pressure that Nagne had on him early because of the level 2. Splyce easily tracking NIP through the bottom side jungle, so not getting caught out on that one. And it's only a matter of time before they pop that Rift Herald. Potentially even in the bottom lane now if they look for it, but they're grouping around, heading bottom and then mid, and a little bit indecisive from Splyce here.
Is an Ocean Drake for them there if they want it. You want to get those earlier on in the game to help you in these earlier skirmishes. And we see a lot of teams use the Rift Herald down towards the mid lane, Stress. That tends to be where people want to open up the map a little bit more.
Yeah, of course, when you've got a Taliyah in the lane, it's good at pushing it back out. You just kind of give her a problem so big you can't deal with it and just crush through mid lane. Very easy concept that you see a lot against the Orianna. A lot of teams, however, kind of just wait on Rift Herald, and you see the jungler panic and go, oh no, I've got to just spawn it wherever. This is not one of those times.
Five-man group.
Here you go, with the wave. Gonna push it through mid lane. No sign of the enemy minions either for now.
Exactly what you want to see from Splyce. They group up mid, they will get the turret pretty easily. NIP have no way of reacting. You know HeaQ's in the bottom lane, you know Prophet's in the top, and that's a mid lane tower for Splyce.
And importantly, HeaQ has nothing to gain bottom side apart from a little bit of farm and experience. He cannot afford to push up to that tower, and Prophet was so far back in the lane that he couldn't threaten a tower kill either. So it means Splyce had set the map up for their Rift Herald play and executed it really nice. From here though, NIP, you have to look at what can they do to get back in this game. It's going to revolve around getting picks, utilizing HeaQ and potentially Prophet. But look, NIP trying to push down the mid lane tower. It's not like they have a Rift Herald to do this. It's not quite as strong.
Braum puts up the Unbreakable and stops a lot of the damage. Something we talked about in picks and ban stresses and was talked about on the analyst desk by DeFisher was they're saying Splyce have had these good drafts. They've been able to get through pick and ban very successfully with strong compositions, but they don't quite execute those compositions that well. Here we see them playing around Trashy, playing around the fact that Wunder was camped early on, and it seems very much more like they understand what they want to do with this 5-man composition.
And Splyce, I think, historically have always felt confident when they could have Wunder ahead in the side lane. You take it to the next level when Sencux can do that, but this isn't that type of playstyle for Splyce right now. And I'm glad to see them looking at executing these compositions, because look, everybody is bringing a form of crowd control, and that makes team fighting exceptionally easy when you just land one stun and you just keep stunning the same target over and over and over. Lock them in the ultimatum as well, just throw everything. And from there, Splyce should have very linear team fights, whereas NIP, this game is about to turn into protect HeaQ at all costs, and when the enemy have got a Syndra and a Camille, it's not exactly easy.
And one of the problems for NIP as well is they're starting to fall behind on gold. They're about 1,000 down now, and it begins to tell slightly in the items. Chain of Corruption actually misses as HeaQ gets away, but you look at NIP and they're going down this defensive path with items. Bramble Vest is something we do see commonly early on from top laners, but a Banshee's Veil on Nagne is his first completed item. Compare that to Sencux, who has a Morello Nomicon and a needlessly large rod. I know where I want my damage to come from.
Yeah, definitely a lot lacking on the damage. Now, of course, Nagne is looking to kind of deny some of that early crowd control. You don't want to get hit by a Sejuani ultimate from half the map away and get killed in the middle lane. But as you said, Mercury Tread's Banshee's Veil isn't going to have the most amount of damage output on top of that. That means they need to look at Prophet, potentially for more damage. Or you're trying to do what G2 have been successful with and rely purely on a Caitlyn. But, oh, Prophet, he's going to use his TP, and Splyce are not going to commit to that. So that is a summon a spell used for nothing.
And Wunder has his TP still up. Now, Stress, You know, I take after QuickShot in a lot of ways. I model myself on him as a caster sometimes. I have a quick stat for you, Stress.
Okay.
I'm going to call it a medic stat for the time being.
Okay.
NIP, in games they have won, never lose a dragon. Splyce just took an Ocean Drake. Oof. We know the game's over. We know it's done. The game is done.
Can we just tell them to go to game 2? Is that... May as well. Yeah. I mean,
you might as well. You know you've lost. Yeah, you know you've lost. You are behind in gold as well, 2,000, and you're going to lose a bit more.
Splyce, that's only the 17th dragon taken. Didn't need quick stats on that one. We got a whole team to deliver this with a graphic that was nice. That's at least this split. So, you know, just secures the win all over. All they had to do was that, and they have finally got it. But look, Splyce right now. Ocean Drake was taken a while ago. They take the bot lane tower. They still have teleport advantage to work with. Realistically, NIP are in for the long haul there here. If they really want to get in this game, it means they need to give as much farm as they can to HeaQ, which basically keeps him in that bottom lane, or at least pushed under a tower for as long as possible. And that gives Splyce a lot of freedom on the map. If there is no damage to contend with, Splyce can just freely walk towards any area they know HeaQ isn't.
Ooh, Shook lands onto Kobbe, kicks him away though because he flashes the wall, and here come the chains. Splyce wanted this fight from the very moment it began. Prophet tries to jump out, but he gets pulled right back into the cage, and Splyce get 2 kills once again.
As soon as the kick went the wrong way, NIP lost that fight. They did not get the lockdown onto Kobbe. Kobbe was able to survive, they lose 2, and now Splyce are looking to shut down some more in the top lane. They want to try and go for extra objectives. Look, we're only 19 minutes in, there is no Baron to take.
Nagne has to flash, but Kobbe is not done yet, nor is Wunder. Another kill for the Camille, and Splyce are just pugnacious and belligerent. They keep pushing their advantage further and further and further.
All right, I know we've got 2 Brits on the desk and 2 on this caster desk, but that is some flowery vocabulary. Pretty much as flowery as your shirt, but look, I'm pretty sure you were trying to describe this engage from Splyce. They're very aggressive. I don't need to mince words on that. They just go under the tower. They go. This is actually the first half of the fight that we're seeing on the second end of it. Kobbe, the kick missed on him. He ended up getting kicked back towards the safe area of the map, and Splyce easily able to take down 2.
And we saw Shook doing what we said he needed to do. He tried to get on towards one of those squishy carries on the back line. It almost worked. If Kobbe hadn't flashed across the wall, he would have been kicked back in towards the rest of NIP, but Splyce just ever so slightly quicker on the reactions, and it means they have a 4,000 gold lead 20 minutes in. This is disaster for NIP, because even when they've got a gold lead at 20 minutes, they only win about 20% of their matches. They lose every single time they have a gold deficit.
You've come prepared with stats. You're like, this game's gonna end super quick. Quick, put as many stats in as we possibly can, get them all in. It's okay, Medic. We got it. It's a best of 3. We might have some more. It's some great points on their ability to close games. Honestly, I look at this game and I say, okay, Splyce, it's going to be a very difficult game to end up giving away to NIP, because look, they have the strength in the side lane through Wunder, Trinity Force completed with the Tiamat. NIP is struggling in the team fights because they have no damage outside of HeaQ, and even HeaQ is only on a static Shiv, where Kobbe has a Blade of the Ruined King completed. HeaQ doesn't have his Infinity Edge. That means he is 2.5 items away from being useful in this game.
And coming back to something we discussed in Picks and Bans as well, Prophet did not get the early lead he needed to in this lane. Now Wunder is ahead at 2-0-3, has a Trinity Force, has a Titanic Hydra. Sencux actually caught out. Shook's going in on towards Sencux, but look at the damage onto Nagne. He's going to fall as the first in the fray. Down towards the bottom side of this fight, we will see Wunder with a flank. Splyce are looking for this. Mikyx does have the Glacial Fissure if he wants to go in. Lands the Winter's Bite. Sprattel puts the Lantern behind it, but here comes Wunder. They're looking for Shook. Jump straight on towards him with the Hextech Ultimatum. Shook, you can't jump out of that, but he will still try and escape. Splyce will chase him down. It's a rampage for Sencux, and it's 9 kills to 2 for Splyce.
Shook knew all he needed to do was kick Wunder out. The problem is they're so far behind that it's easy to regroup onto a jungler, and the reason they didn't go for HeaQ there is they know Baron is on the cards, and if Shook is still dead for 20 seconds. It's an easy take, no smite steal available. HeaQ doesn't even have any damage at this point. They aren't even likely to push this tower down because Splyce can split focus right now, secure the Baron, push NIP away from the tower, and realistically this game is going to ramp up very quickly for Splyce with the Baron buff. No TP on Prophet or Wunder, but that means they're stuck in the side lane and Wunder will win that fight. And this is how it all started. Nagne, remember, he's got a Banshee's Veil, he's got Mercury Treads, it's really nice. It's not going to help you too much against the damage from Kobbe. It'll help him get out of some of that crowd control quicker, but when there's 3 pieces of crowd control, Mercury Treads won't do all that much to save your life. Fast forward to the rest of the fight, Shook's like, I've got this. I can get out. I can just kick Wunder out of the ultimatum. Ah, damn, they do a lot of damage on top of that. And Shook, stunned up, taken down into the Baron. Splyce are in total control.
This is the Splyce we wanted to see as well, Stress. They needed to send a statement today. They are sitting in the middle of Group B. If they can get these wins, they can look towards getting into playoffs and then perhaps running the gauntlet to Worlds. But if they don't, and they come 4th place, there is no chance of them going back to Worlds this year. So they need to be able to defeat teams like NIP easily and then use that confidence to take it into future matchups.
That is very fair. I'm just wondering, Medic, do you have another word for me for dominant? Because we might need a couple of synonyms.
Let me look up a few. I've got my words to work on.
Oh,
here.
hang on. You might need to focus on mid lane.
Wunder's going to pop down the Hextech ultimatum. HeaQ getting melted away.
Oh,
and actually, Wunder
going.
will just take the kill. That was wonderful play from him.
3 versus 1 didn't even matter in the middle lane because Splyce were able to get a kill from it. Now, of course, that does remove the Baron buff from Wunder. That's a minor inconvenience at best at this point. There's Splyce looking to push through the middle lane, looking to continue this because, look, they've got the rest of their team fighting abilities up. They have Sencux ultimate for damage. They've got Trashy's ult, Kobbe's ult, Mikyx's ult. Everything is still there to be able to take a fight if NIP wanted to try.
And they're now 7,000 gold ahead. Look at Wunder. When you can 2v1 like this, you know you're winning.
And I believe even the support is coming closer to this fight as well. So look, Shook manages to connect. It was a nice trap placement there to make sure they could catch Wunder, and Shook tries to get into the fight, but Wunder, a little bit too much mobility. Even gets onto HeaQ under the tower. Make it a 4v1.
And I'm interested in Shook's build here slightly as well, Stress, because he's gone Dead Man's Plate after the Warriors. He is tanky on this Lee Sin. There was an option to go towards a more Assassin and more AD-heavy Lee Sin here if he wanted to try and snowball that early game.
There was the option there. I've even seen people in solo queue building Duskblade on Lee Sin, which is kind of frustrating to see.
It's disgusting, is what it is, Stress.
But Shook knows he is basically the initiation tool right now for NIP. He has to go in, he has to go aggressive, and realistically, the mobility that Dead Man's Plate gives him will help a small amount, but the ability to stay alive for that moment longer is what he's looking for here. You know, full damage Lee Sin does great in solo queue, not so much in competitive because he's very easy to get shut down. If you hit him with any kind of crowd control, or even Syndra's ult, probably not going to survive very long. You should try it at one point.
I'm really bad at mechanics. I'm a support main. I cannot do mechanics for the life of me. People flame me in like gold when I try and auto-attack things.
Wait, but you mean like you're not very dexterous to be able to hit the buttons very quickly?
I think my fingers are just too fat. I think that's what it is.
Medic, you trained as a surgeon. Why are you telling me this? Like,
why do you think I quit?
Well, let's not go into that story. That risks lawsuits going through here because, whew, don't want to think about it.
Let's come back to the state of the game, Stress. Splyce now can go for this 1-4 if they want. Camille in the bottom lane, the rest of the team getting vision control around this blue side. Kobbe splitting up towards the top as well. And Splyce have just been able to dismantle NIP. NIP's early lead evaporated incredibly quickly. Splyce looking very much like a team that can challenge for the top spots in Group B.
The one thing that Splyce haven't been able to do is make significant progress into the base of NIP, and now that does allow NIP some breathing room back into this game, and we have to look at potentially missed opportunities from Splyce. They haven't been quite as proactive on utilizing Trashy's ultimate to force fights, to get NIP and catch them out. Like, they could potentially look for a fight here, but the reason they're not is because of how far away Sencux is. Maybe if Splyce were moving as a unit, that tower is easily threatened because of how far ahead Splyce are. That would be one area I'd like to see them pushing forward a little bit more.
I think part of it as well is losing the Baron buff on Wunder. It means his split push isn't quite as strong as it could be, but Splyce are setting up to methodically take out this second tier of turrets. Do we ever get to the point where HeaQ gets to 2-3 items and can challenge Nagne at a couple of items when he's got a bit more damage under his belt, can challenge as well?
Well, if Splyce don't get critical damage on the base now, it is possible, but look, because HeaQ shows on the bottom side, Splyce are very confident moving into the top side. This is what they have to continue doing, is every time a second member of NIP commits to the bottom lane, continue pushing forward, try and start fights. Problem is, NIP have a very quick path to the bottom lane through their own base, and that means Splyce may end up misreading a situation and over-pushing, but...
Splyce deciding to 5-man group here. They will land the chains. Prophet's going to take a lot of damage. Here comes Wunder, jumps in with the Hexagol Ultimatum, but he's dead already. And we're going to see Mikyx fall low as well. NIP able to hold on to their base, and Nagne wants a little bit more. Is he the Lord of the top lane alongside being the Lord of the pit? Well, at the moment, he's the Lord of the dance as he tries to dodge around, but he gets taken out as well. HeaQ melted, outplayed, totally outplayed Stress. He was just incredibly out-mechanicked there by the Syndra, and Splyce are going to look to push in towards this top turret as well.
Those Emetic mechanics, just hit him with the Syndra ultimate, hit the inhibitor and move right through. Okay, so that at first was an overcommit from Splyce. Wunder just jumps right into the base. He's like, I'm ready to go. Who wants to fight? Finds a couple of members of NIP, and NIP turn back around on that. But, I mean, NIP almost gifted an opportunity back into this game by how Wunder actually got... Was that pushed in by Nagne? I'm not sure whether Wunder was trying to jump in as it was, but maybe Nagne actually managed to catch him out. Then Nagne goes aggressive into the fight, tries to dodge around all of this, but look, from here, remember, HeaQ, the only damage source, gets too close to Sencux, puts himself right in between the tower and the wall, easy slow to apply into the ultimate. HeaQ drops down 0-3-3, still nowhere near that damage point we wanted him to get to.
Trying to fight against a Syndra when you are 4 kills behind is like trying to play dodgeball against that really big lad in your high school class. You know you're going to get hit by a ball at some point, and you know it's going to hurt.
Wait, I think you were playing dodgeball wrong. You're meant to dodge.
You're meant to dodge them, but you can't, is my point, because this guy is just too good at throwing the balls.
Okay, I think we got lost on that. I was imagining a really wide
it wasn't the best
target.
anecdote.
I was like, that guy would be really easy to...
I'm quite big. It's hard to dodge balls, Stress.
I'm not trying to bring up bad memories. I'm sorry, Medic.
My entire childhood.
I'm actually a little...
Baron's going to be... Please. Baron's going to be started here by Splyce as they are 10,000 gold ahead. This will be their second of the game, and perhaps with it will spell the end of NIP. TP coming in here from Wunder as they try and join the fight. Splyce have turned around. They get the Glacial Prism on towards Nagne, and here comes Wunder from the back line. That's one. They're looking for a lot more, though. They're not content. Mikyx gets the kill onto Nagne with a beautiful Winter's Bite, and Shook, Prophet, and Sprattel just have to run away, but will they be chased down by Splyce? Sencux has the flank here. Wunder has the jump in. Sprattel has the flash, but it's just not enough to get away from Splyce. 15 kills to 4. Splyce are looking for the win.
Don't even need the Baron buff. They have the numbers advantage. 5 versus 2 into the base, and Splyce, it's looked dominant. We didn't have a synonym for it. It doesn't even matter. 30 minutes on the clock. They're going to pick up game 1.
Devastating, destructive, and absolutely top-notch here from Splyce. They want a couple more kills to close it out. They'll get the ace, they'll get the Nexus, and they'll go 1-0 up over NIP.
A lot of people would have expected that result. Some people would have questioned how clean it would have been, but I think this game actually played out in a lot of the ways you'd expect it to. NIP making the early game plays, trying to get ahead against Splyce, utilizing this Lee Sin out of Shook, and it looked to be good, but the problem was this composition. When you start going the defensive route on items, means that Caitlyn just cannot contend against everything Splyce was bringing. The Syndra was on point from Sencux, and Splyce able to just take the early skirmishes very effectively.
And NIP is still unable to get a win in the LCS. I almost called it the Challenger Series.
Win,
Yeah, a series win. I'm so used to casting the Challenger Series with you, I almost called it the Challenger Series. But yes, still unable to get a series win. They can still come back, but the signs of hope that we looked for coming in the early game presence wasn't really there to the usual effect of NIP.
And a lot of that is the fact that HeaQ's champion pool, in the meta, at least what is the most effective, got obliterated in the draft. 5 bans from the enemy team, plus 1 ban from his own team onto the jungle pool. Made it a little difficult for HeaQ to realistically have that easy platform in the game. The Lee Sin just didn't have the effect later on.
I'm trying to look and see if perhaps one of those second-tier tanks would have been a bit better. Skarner, Rammus was still there as well. Something that we have seen in LCK that can be played at the highest level.
Yeah, it's difficult to know because I think those champions have very obvious weaknesses that if you haven't practiced, it isn't necessarily easy to just put them right into your champion pool, but HeaQ's going to need to find something for game 2.
Yeah, Splyce came out swinging against the ninjas in Pyjamas. Let's send it over to the analyst desk for more on their win.
Thank you very much, Medic. All by the book for Splyce. They clean this one out and win over NIP in the first game. And we asked a lot of questions beforehand, especially how can NIP win? You said, well, draft something that is easy. They can go a bit, they can force a fight. But it seemed to be quite intricate in the end. So how would you rate their comp in terms of the game plan you'd made for them?
In terms of the game plan I wanted to make with their 5-man mid, a lot of tanks, just engaged team fights, I don't think the comp really fit that style. They invested almost everything in the early game. Basically saying, you know, they can win bot lane with Caitlyn Thresh, they can maybe win top lane with Jarvan, they can try to get pushed mid lane with Taliyah, and then you have a HeaQ on Lee Sin to gank. That is just very hard to execute, I feel like, especially you already are a weaker team. And that's kind of one of the problems for NIP was they didn't really fit with their Misfits meta we saw earlier today.
The Misfits meta where Maxlor also picked up the Maokai, and I thought that was maybe something that HeaQ could go for because there were a lot of junglers banned out. He honestly didn't have a lot of things to choose from, but a Maokai was open, a Rek'Sai maybe even in some universe was open. So do you think the Lee Sin was detrimental or kind of what didn't make this comp come together?
I think right now that if you pick Lee Sin or any other early game jungler, you need to be an incredibly good team to execute the early game, get a lead, and then you need to make 0 mistakes mid and late game, which is why I would say the meta is not towards these kind of early picks right now. It's more towards these tanks where early game you can play it a bit slower. Maybe against the full early game team, you'll be 2k behind, but you just have to accept that, get to mid game, go 5 mid, make a pick, and then you instantly win the game.
What do you think about the Jarvan Camille matchup top lane, Alfari?
I mean, I think Jarvan is a really strong pick, like particularly as a blind pick, which NIP did this game. It's really easy to just like push out a side lane once you get like mid game, and you just roll mid lane, and if Baron's alive, you can start Baron and turn really easily, or you can just engage in the mid lane if they try to contest the push by EQ ulting in. And Camille is like a decent answer. Like Jax was banned, which is like another answer to Jarvan. So Splyce going Camille is like kind of predictable, and they went it, and it scales better than Jarvan, but early game it does get pushed in, which was NIP's main opening into the game, I think. Having like all pushing lanes in the early game jungler, they just didn't snowball it.
Yeah, I mean, we were always saying NIP maybe go for something easier than execute, but if early games leads are something they have been able to win, then they shouldn't give that up because that's almost the only thing they have, or...
I mean, yes and no, just because it's so inconsistent and when they do win the early game, like so often it's based on can HeaQ pull off like 2 or 3 early ganks, and we haven't really seen that recently either. So I think when the meta is where you can actually draft like almost pure team fight, those kind of comps often are a little bit easier to play. Like this game, we can actually just already pull up some of the replays we have because it shows early game how where NIP was supposed to get the advantage with all the pushing lanes. It ended up being stuff like this happening over and over where Splyce would just find them in the side lanes and like engage team fights.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about NIP, but obviously Splyce won this game and Splyce also came out with a well-rounded comp. We were asking the question, can some of their individuals step up? And Wunder had a great game, Sencux had a good game, even though they didn't really hit all the skill shots in this particular fight.
Hit the Syndra ult.
They hit the Syndra ult, which is incredibly, incredibly difficult. But how do you think they played it out, Maxlor?
Splyce?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did a pretty good job on making sure that Camille ramps up, and whenever she has priority, they used it. For example, this TP play they did top lane, it was mainly because the Jarvan TP'd bot lane and made a pick on the enemy jungler, Sejuani. So they then TP'd on NIP who were overextended, they made a pick, and they just completely destroyed them. Even though they missed 3 ultis, it just shows the power of a teamfight composition. You mess up, but you're still going to get away with it. Mid-late game, you scale better than them, so it just... Why would you not pick this kind of comp if you're... I don't think there's any team in the world that can execute an early game comp really well because, as I said, you have to win early and play perfectly mid and late, which is also why, in my opinion, there's a slump on SKT's side because they're not drafting tank support and tank jungler and stuff like this and playing for this ARAM kind of thing. They're still playing early game and it's just biting them back.
Oh, I love it. We're talking about Splyce and IP and we get the SKT,
SKT
insight. That's
there.
why you invite players on the desk. You'd never go there.
Oof.
I mean, I wouldn't. I guess the reason I wouldn't go there is because it's NIP Splyce, but I mean.
It was a fantastic analogy,
Kind of
though.
the same, yeah.
Yeah, it was a fantastic analogy, but then the big question remains, okay, Splyce, we wanted to see more, want to see them win games, but winning versus NIP, much as your victory over Mysterious Monkeys, you'd say this is a game they have to win no matter what. And it's so difficult to say what NIP kind of has to come up with. So do you guys have any ideas? Because Prophet has been getting leads in lanes and has been able to get early kills, but how could they leverage that? If it was you, would you pick something completely different that can take over the game? Would you only split push Alfari?
I mean, I think their draft this game was like okay. I like if they had a tank jungler like a Maokai, like Maxwell said, I would actually like the draft. They have 3 pushing lanes, and they would actually scale fine with the Maokai. So they should like be able to get deep walls early game. They should be able to get like roams off and first blood tower for sure. Maybe even like a herald, and just they should get advantages early game, and then they should be able to still teamfight with the Maokai. So I think their draft was fine. I think they just need to not be so hesitant when they have like so early game champions that are supposed to get leads, to actually use them, because they had these early game champions, but then they just use them to just stay even, which is not going to work.
All right, well, we'll see if that is the adaptation they make in Game 2. Splyce, they are looking to secure the win against Ninjas in Pyjamas coming up after the break.